Hello everyone, this is Jonathan Little, and in this video, I'm going to be reviewing my biggest online win ever in terms of buy-ins. In this tournament, which was an $11 tournament with 17,000 people, I took second place for roughly $15,000. So that is 1,500 buy-ins. To put that in perspective, if this was a $10,000 buy-in tournament, that means I would have cashed for $15 million. So this is a pretty big accomplishment in terms of buy-ins. Obviously, $15,000 isn't a ton of actual cash for me. However, I don't think I'm ever going to have a tournament where I win 1,500 buy-ins for the rest of my life. So I wanted to share this with you guys. It's worth noting that whenever I loaded up this tournament, I was pretty much loading up every tournament that was starting on PokerStars. I tend to register all of the high-stakes tournaments that are roughly $100 and higher. And then they have a few tournaments each day that are $10, $20, and $30 that they tend to get a huge player pool. So I always make a point to play those games, because usually if there's 17,000 people in a tournament, it's going to be a pretty soft tournament. So I decided to hop in this $10 game and play it. It's worth mentioning that I actually think that your return on investment in these events is going to be huge. And for that reason, I've actually been skipping some of the relatively tough tournaments, like the $600 tournament that's on Full Tilt. That tournament is a very small field, and it's pretty much all professionals. And I really think that if it's a $600 tournament, you're maybe going to turn 7% return on investment after a rake. And seeing how the variance in that is huge, because you have a very small return on investment, you're actually much better off playing a $10 tournament on PokerStars, because you're probably going to have 150% or 200% return on investment. So that's $20 or $30. And whenever you have a gigantic return on investment, you tend to collect that return on investment faster. So anyways, I've been opting out of playing the very difficult tournaments in favor of playing the significantly softer tournaments. So I'm going to be going through all of the hands from this hand history. And just recognize that I'm probably somewhat on autopilot, because, like I said, I loaded up all the tournaments that started. So I imagine I'm going to be playing a little bit tighter than normal, but at the same time, I'm certainly not going to be super nitty. But if we see me make any folds that look absurdly tight, I'm just letting you know that's probably why that was happening. So in this hand, we have King 10 offsuit. I think I probably should raise, but folding's fine, calling's fine. I don't think it matters that much. Given that I expect my opponents to make pretty big errors, I probably should play this hand. And I imagine raising is probably going to be best, but limping's also perfectly fine. If we got this flop and this guy bet 20, I would call and see what develops on the turn. I'm definitely not going to play junky hands from early position. I've been making a point to play a much more tight, aggressive game from early position and a much more loose, aggressive game from late position in general. And you're really going to see that as we get deeper in this tournament. I really start getting after it. Right here with the King 10 offsuit, I think this is a very easy fold. Even if I expect my opponents to be weak, King 10 offsuit is not a hand you want to be defending versus a raise and a call from out of position. This is a super easy fold that I'm pretty much never ever playing. And as you see, we were in very, very bad shape. And this is not shocking. I mean, I'm kind of surprised this guy had ace king. I mean, you would think you would 3-bet, but I'm not surprised to see that someone had us dominated. That's what's going to happen most of the time when you have a hand like King 10. All right, so here I just raised the button. I'm fine with min raising. I'm fine with 3xing it. Whenever I'm playing online, most of the time, for simplicity, especially if I have a lot of tables going, I'm going to be min raising. And I think this tournament started at 2 p.m. So that means I was already in games, or I started loading games, I believe, at noon. So I probably had a fairly full slate at the moment. So I'm probably going to be min raising just to make things easier. I imagine that making it 60 is probably ideal, but I don't think it matters. Ace 2 offsuit, I'm just going to fold. There's no point in raising from middle position with ace 10 offsuit. Not a good hand. I'm just going to see a flop with the Jack 10. I could certainly lead on this flop. The problem is there are 2 spades on board, and if I get raised, I'm not really loving it. So I think I'm probably just going to check fold. I think check raising is fine. I think check calling is marginal. I like check raising more than I like check calling, because if you check raise, you can continue betting on a lot of turns and make your opponent fold out various overcards, various marginal pairs. But whenever you check call, you allow your opponent to check behind the turn and then just call you if you decide to bluff the river. So I think if I'm going to continue in this hand, I need to check raise, but I'm fine with folding. I don't have a problem with that. 4-2 offsuit, I will fold every time, unless my opponent's just the absolute nittiest player. All right, so it's worth mentioning that we have these statistics on our opponents. The V, the number next to the V, is 43 in this scenario. That is how many percentage, or what percentage of hands this guy's playing. So 43% of hands is a ton. And the P next to that is the preflop raise percentage. So this guy's raising 22% of hands. So whenever you see someone raising 22% of hands and limping, or playing 43% of hands, that means he's limping a lot of his weaker hands. So knowing that, I should probably raise this. But at the time, when I was playing this in game, I likely did not have all of these numbers. And if I did, you have to recognize I only have 22 hands on this guy, or 23 hands. That is this number right here. That doesn't really tell us too much about what he's doing. So I'm fine with folding this, but if I saw this guy having these statistics in the long run, I would definitely raise. And in live poker, this would be someone who is raising his good hands, limping his bad hands, and it's fairly obvious. So I would certainly consider raising that, but I don't think it's mandatory. 5-3 offsuit's no good. Pocket jacks I'll certainly raise, so I 3x it, and I do think 3x is ideal whenever we are this deep stacked. Jack 9 suited, you can raise, you can fold, it doesn't much matter. From early position, again, I'm fine folding. If I raised to, say, 90, and this guy made it 240, I would take a flop, but I'd be pretty unhappy about it. This guy probably has something pretty good, given that he's relatively short stacked. So here we are now at a new table. Facing an early position min raise and 2 callers, this is another scenario where you definitely do not want to get involved. This is a very bad hand that's going to be dominated a lot of the time by someone. So just get out of the way again. There's no purpose in playing those type of hands. A lot of people say, oh, you have 2 Broadway cards you need to play, but in reality, you're just going to find yourself dominated a ton of the time. So there's no point in getting involved there. Ace King, I will be getting involved. And again, I don't actually have these statistics on these players yet, so I don't know that these are this player's numbers. If I knew this guy was raising 22% of hands, I would probably play this. You can actually click on this and see where he's raising from, and we see VPIP from early position and preflop raise from early position is 16%. Yeah, so wait, I'm confused. This is 44%. I'm sorry, my apologies. 44% from early position. So this is what happens whenever you only have a 45-hand sample on a guy. The numbers are kind of skewed. Obviously, players are going to be playing more hands from late position, but we probably just have, well, we do have a small sample, so they're not too incredibly relevant here. That being said, assuming I'm playing this hand blind, I definitely like calling over re-raising. And the reason I like calling is because if I re-raise and then this guy decides to 4-bet me, I mean, I can't fold because the guy only has 60 big blinds and I'm playing a $10 tournament because he could just be losing his mind. But I'm not happy about getting it all in. And with Ace King, you want to try to get it all in happily. So this is a scenario where I'm going to call, and I'm probably going to float on a lot of flops. And after that, we will see what develops. So check, check. I can check or I can bet. I think I would prefer a check, but betting's fine. Betting is not such a bad play because we're going to make our opponents fold various undercards, so it's effectively a protection bet. Also, we do have the ace of diamonds, which is great. I bet kind of small. I think I would have preferred just a little bit bigger to really make my opponents fold all of their junk. I don't want to get check raised in this scenario because I'm going to have to fold. So I think I would have preferred more like 140. I think that would have made my opponents play a little bit more straightforward. So in this, the big blind calls, I'm not loving it. He checks, and I just decide to check behind. If I was going to barrel, this is not such a bad card to barrel because I could easily have a jack. I think in this scenario, my options are to bet something like 270 on the turn, and then if he calls, bet something like 700 on the river. I think that's going to get him to fold most of his hands worse than a jack, and that should be most of his range. However, in the small stakes tournaments like this, I'm a really big fan of not pushing what I perceive to be small edges, and I do think that's going to be a relatively small edge. And it's a very high risk edge. So this goes back to the idea that I expect to have a very high return on investment in this game, and I'm not going to realize that if I'm running relatively high risk bluffs, because if I bluff off 1,000 chips in this hand, it certainly hurts my return on investment. So I'm probably just going to give up in this scenario. He bets the river. I could actually see calling this. I think we're going to win it roughly 25% of the time. We beat all of the draws. We obviously lose to the 10. The question then becomes, will he value bet a 10 on the river? And I think a good player probably would. Would he fold a 10 if I raised? He might. And if he would fold that to a raise, then I think that raising becomes pretty cool. The problem is I just can't have it too. So you have to be careful whenever you're trying to represent hands that you could actually represent, or actually have what you're trying to represent. It's incredibly difficult for me to have a 2 in this scenario. I do decide to look him up, and I don't love this. I don't hate it. I think we're going to be shown a 10 a decent amount of the time, but I do beat a lot of the draws. It's actually a problem that I have the ace of diamonds in this hand, because that makes it less likely that he has a flush draw. So now I'm really just hoping he has a bad gut shot or open-ended straight draw on the flop, or a worse flush draw. He actually has pocket eights, and that's always brutal when this happens, because I don't even know if this guy was value betting or bluffing on the river. And I'm not sure if he knew if he was value betting or bluffing on the river, but it certainly worked out for him. So just take notes on that kind of thing, and don't recognize that guy is value betting thin on the river when he half pots, or at least he could be value betting thin on the river. And don't pay him off in the future, or raise him in the future. All right, so here we have a 4 times a big blind raise. Definitely take note of that kind of thing. King 2 offsuit in the small blind facing a min raise. This is a very easy fold. Again, I don't think there's any purpose in playing this hand at all. All right, pocket jacks versus the same guy. I would be a little bit more prone to re-raise this one, because he has shown that he's not tight at this point. So I'm fine with re-raising, and I'm fine with calling. Again, I don't think you have to 3-bet preflop. I think a lot of players feel like they must 3-bet preflop, but you have to realize that in position, a lot of good things can happen for you. And the last thing you want to do is re-raise and then have the guy 4-bet you, and then you're all of a sudden playing a gigantic pot. So I'm a pretty big fan of not playing gigantic pots. So he bets 120. I'm just going to call. I have the best hand almost every time. If I raise, he's probably going to fold out everything, maybe an 8 or worse, and that should be a pretty good percentage of his range. Also, the problem is that I get a lot of action whenever he has me crushed, and he's probably going to try to pot control the other hand, so I definitely don't like raising the flop. The turn is effectively a blank. It's relatively tough for him to have an 8. So when he bets again, I think he's starting to become fairly polarized to a hand he thinks is the best, as in he's value betting, or a bluff like ace king or ace queen. And if he has a hand that he's bluffing with, I definitely don't want to make him fold those, because I want him to bluff the river. And if he has a hand that he thinks is best, I feel like if I raise in this scenario, he's probably going to play those fairly well. Meaning if he has pocket 7s and is deciding to value bet it, he's probably going to fold that to a raise. And if he has pocket 9s, maybe he folds that to a raise. But if he has aces, I don't think he's ever folding that to a raise. So I definitely think calling is the only play that makes any sense. He checks the river on a queen, and I think I should probably go for thin value. However, the pot is already fairly large. Whenever the pot becomes very big, it's never really that big of a deal to check behind, because our opponent could easily have me beat. I mean, he could just have queen jack or queen 10 or king queen and have barreled the flop and turn and now decide to check for pot control, fearing that I have the jack, or fearing that I have an 8. So I'm okay with checking. I think checking is perfectly fine. I also think value betting is pretty cool. I think a small value bet would be a pretty good play. I think he would look us up with perhaps as weak as ace high if I bet something like 240. So I think that might be the ideal play in this scenario. I go 420, and I think this is probably a little bit too big. By betting 420, I'm trying to get called by pairs, and I'm not entirely convinced he actually has a pair. I think I would rather bet really small, like 240. I think that's going to get called by a lot of ace highs, and I definitely think that ace high is well within his range. And so he does fold. So I think I probably made a betting error in this scenario. And this is something I actually have to work on. I recognize that I do this sometimes where I don't think about the ranges as accurately as I do whenever I'm analyzing the hands after the tournament. Whenever I'm playing a ton of tables. And it's sort of interesting because I recognize when I play a lot of tables, I am voluntarily giving up equity in these tournaments in exchange for just playing many more of them. So it's a trade-off, and sometimes you are going to miss out on spots like that. But we can definitely talk about them and try to find the best lines. This is another scenario where if an under the gun or second position player raised, I would just fold this, especially given how tight these two guys are. They're not playing any hands. Once they fold to me, I'll certainly raise. Notice the blinds are already somewhat high. We're playing 25-50, so we only have 60 big blinds. Ugh. So we get top pair on the flop. This guy leads into us. This is the player who 4x'd it a minute ago. Let's actually see how he got his chips. I definitely did not know this in real time, but it's always nice just to see how it goes down. Wow, so this guy just has to have the nuts. Oh, he has nothing. This guy has a flush. This guy has a flush. Okay. Not a great play by this player with the 8-7 of clubs, in my opinion. But whatever. Okay, so this guy made a flush. I don't think he did anything too fancy to get his chips. Besides not folding a flush. It's not too hard to not fold a flush. All right, so when he leads into me, I'm just going to call. I'm not loving my hand. It's sort of interesting that once your opponent leads into you on the flop, your hands are effectively bluff catchers at that point because you can't just blast money in blindly. He bets again on the turn. I'm not going to fold. 4 is a very good river for me. It's very difficult for that to improve his hand. So I either had the best hand on the flop or I was just crushed the whole way. And it's pretty tough for me to be crushed the whole way. I only realistically lose to King Jack and pocket sixes. Maybe 7-6 by the river or 6-4 by the river. So I think this is a very, very easy call. By calling the flop in the turn, it makes my hand look much weaker than it actually is. So this is a really good spot just to call and hope to have the best hand. And I expect to have the best hand a lot. And you may look at this and say, oh, you could have raised and got your stack in. But you have to realize that when my opponent's beat, he's not necessarily going to put his stack in. But whenever I am beat, he's always going to put his stack in. So I don't think this is a scenario where I just want to raise the flop and try to blast my stack. And even though I do beat a lot of the opponent's range. And also, he didn't have to have a king there. He could just be bluffing with queen 10 or something like that. So don't be results oriented in thinking that the guy must have a marginal hand worse than mine. I mean, if I knew he had king 8, of course I would have played the hand differently, but we don't know the guy has king 8. If I knew this player's stats, I would have considered raising. I don't think it's necessary, but he seems to be opening a decent amount of hands. He seems to be not 3-betting very often, so that makes me think that he probably is playing a just loose-ish pre-flop game, but will fold to a lot of pressure, but I don't get involved there. There's no point in getting involved. Especially when there are no antes in play, there's nothing wrong with playing a very snug game. I mean, so far, I actually have done nothing fancy in the least bit for the first 47 hands of the tournament, and I won 1,000 chips, right? I mean, I even made a somewhat marginal call with ace-king, and I lost. I got down to 2,000 chips or something like that, or 2,500 chips, but I have done nothing fancy so far, right? I've played 47 hands. I've gotten two good hands and a few marginal hands, and we won chips. And that's exactly what you want to happen in these small stakes tournaments. You do not have to do anything fancy. I think a lot of players get it in their minds that they have to do fancy things in order to win. But as you're going to see throughout this tournament, I did not do too many things that I thought were blatantly out of line. And there really is a lot to that, especially if your opponents think you may be doing something blatantly out of line. Also, if you look at my statistics, these are just fairly tightish, aggressive-ish stats. I don't think these are particularly crazy. And these are my stats for the day. I played something like 45 tournaments in the day. I guess while I'm on that topic, obviously I won 1,500 buy-ins, which is effectively infinite. The way you have to think about that is if I played this tournament every day for the next 5 years, I could not cash all of them and be even. So 5 years of play, every single day I could play this tournament and I would be even. You have to realize that if I'm playing 40 or 50 tournaments per day, I'm probably going to lose about, if I'm just looking at my past statistics, obviously, I probably run hot in the long run online. But if you look at my stats, I win roughly a third of the time in online tournaments. So if I play a session of 50 games, I'm going to be up buy-ins a pretty good amount of a third of the time. The other 2/3 of the time I'm just losing. And you have to realize that losing 90 tournaments in a row or losing money over 90 tournaments is a pretty brutal thing. I mean, you're going to find that most people don't even play 90 tournaments in a year if they're playing live poker. So you have to be realistic about your expectation in these things, and don't just think that you're going to sit down and automatically crush. I feel like a lot of players get frustrated whenever they lose in the short run, and they don't recognize what the short run is. A lot of people think, oh, I've lost for a year straight up, I must be unlucky, or the game's rigged or something. But in reality, you're going to lose over 100 tournament stretches all the time. I mean, it happens to online tournament players pretty regularly. But if you play enough and you are playing well, you will get lucky sometimes and make some money. And obviously, I actually don't even remember anything that happened in this tournament. I do remember winning with pocket nines versus pocket kings kind of deep in it. So I had to get lucky to do well in this tournament. But you're going to find that if you take second place out of 17,000 people, you're probably going to get lucky. A pretty good amount. All right, so here I raise with pocket kings under the gun. This guy calls. I think this is a great spot to call because I definitely want this player to go all in. That would be perfect for me. I think if I re-raise, it's going to make him fold almost everything. So I'm not concerned with protecting my hand versus pocket eights or ace jack or anything like that. I definitely want this player in the hand so that he can make something and lose a lot of chips to me. And so we just sit here, pick up free equity. Also, worth mentioning, again, I do not think my opponent should have shoved in this hand. I think this is a very easy fold for this opponent. Whenever you're facing an under-the-gun raise, you do not want to get involved with ace X, even with 15 big blinds. It's way too likely the under-the-gun guy has maybe king, jack, or better, and ace 8 suited is crushed versus that range. So a very bad play by my opponent. You're going to find that throughout this tournament, my opponents do make a lot of bad plays, and that's probably why I did so well. You're going to find that usually whenever you do well, it's not because you do anything too special. It's because your opponents do things very poorly, and you, on the other end, don't do things very poorly. So they're giving you chips, but you're not giving them chips. All right, ace-10 offsuit. I mentioned king-10 earlier, how you want to be folding these out of position. However, notice that now that we are 48 hands into this player is probably starting to look fairly weak to me. He's raising a pretty good amount of hands. He seems active. This guy, I don't really know what to think of him. He's not playing very many hands. So I don't really mind taking a flop with the ace-10 here, but I'm going to be somewhat careful. If I get an ace, I'm certainly not going to fold it versus Barbie. I think I could also re-raise. I think I would be willing to get it in for 20 big blinds versus Barbie, but with ace-10 offsuit, you're not ever happy to get all in for 20 big blinds. So I'm fine with just calling. And I'm going to see what develops, but I'm not happy about it. When this guy re-raises, I'm out of here for sure. Even though I'm getting great odds, at this point, my hand is going to be dominated a ton of the time, so there's no point in continuing. No point at all in continuing. So that's the situation where you must be disciplined and just get out of the way. All right, I'm in raise the button. Both of them call. If you find that your opponents are calling from the blinds almost all the time, you may want to start raising a little bit bigger. This is something I will occasionally experiment with, especially in smaller stakes live tournaments, because players sometimes will just not fold to min raises. And if they never fold to min raises, I want to have some fold equity, so I will start making it a little bit bigger. In the higher stakes games, though, people tend to realize that being out of position is not ideal, unless they play really well after the flop. And if they play really well after the flop, again, I may just start making a little bit bigger pre-flop. All right, not a great flop for me. I'm probably just going to give up in this scenario. I have almost no equity. This is something I've been working on recently. I've been trying to give up more often whenever I have almost no equity. If you look at this line right here, this is my bet percentage on the flop, the turn, and the river, I am still pot controlling a decent amount. So you see this bet number. 81 is the flop, 33 is the turn, 60 is the river. So I'm still pot controlling a decent amount, particularly in, I guess, in online poker in general. But that 81 number probably used to be closer to 92 or 93. So I'm trying to find spots like this where I have almost no equity. If I bet and get called, I'm drawing pretty much dead. I don't think I can really bluff my opponents too often. So this is a spot where I'm perfectly fine giving up. We turned some equity, so now I have to ask myself if I should raise or call. I'm obviously not folding because he only bet 60 into 405. I think that calling is reasonable. I think that raising is perfectly fine, but given that I didn't bet the flop, it doesn't look like I have an ace, so I think I need to call. But I folded. And this is an example of a very clear autopiloting error. And I was wondering how many hands it would take for us to find an obvious error, and here it is. So what I was probably thinking here is this guy made a regular bet, like 360, and I would just fold to a 360 bet or a 260 bet. Even then, I could consider peeling. What probably happened, though, is this table was probably buried in a bunch of tables, and I knew I flopped nothing. I knew I flopped stone nothing. So I saw this 5, and I probably didn't think anything about it. So obviously a very clear error, and now I can happily beat myself up for playing poorly. It's always amazing whenever you look at very good online players' games, whenever you look at them, you will find that it's not uncommon to see stuff like that happen, where whenever they're reviewing the hands, they're like, that was autopilot error. I had too many games going, and that's clearly just a sign to me that I need to play fewer tables. That being said, the session where I played this was actually great. I took 2 fourth places in turbo tournaments, and then I took second in this. So it was a good day, and I cashed a Sunday million. So very good day, but that doesn't mean you're still not making errors. So I definitely need to pay better attention. All right, right here, we need to win 41% of the time to call, and King 10 suited is going to be close. In close spots, I think I prefer to fold in general, but this guy does have fairly loose stats, so I don't mind calling. I don't love it, but I think it's certainly close. And as you see, he does have pocket sixes, so it's fine call. If the guy's shoving sixes, I mean, he's probably shoving a lot of hands that I'm in reasonable shape against. But that's another situation where I have been working on not taking coin flip scenarios. Whereas in the past, I'd be just snap getting it in because, King 10 suited, 40% equity all day. But that's not necessarily the case. And especially against tight opponents. This guy's obviously not tight, but you're going to find that if it's close and you think you're better than your opponents, you want to avoid those scenarios. 5-3 offsuit, I'm just going to fold. It's not a good hand. All right, here we have this player, Beast, who seems to be very active. Obviously, again, he just got moved to the table, so I don't know that he's very active yet, so I'm not going to play the ace-6 offsuit. You actually have to be somewhat careful 3-betting players like this, because if you 3-bet them with ace-6 and he calls, he's not folding a lot of flops, I don't think. All right, so here, whenever a guy gets moved to the table and he raises the first hand and everybody folds and he raises the second hand, I'm going to start getting after it against him. I'm just not going to fold every time. I mean, some players come to the table and decide to raise every hand, and I'm going to make sure that doesn't work for them. If he decided to 4-bet me, I'd be pretty unhappy, but I would probably put it all in. So if he 4-bet me, it would be to around 800 or 900 or 1,000, or he may just go all in himself. I would have called off. I would not have been happy about it, but I think my hand is too good, and my opponent's image, even though he's only been here a few hands, is too wild. All right, so fantastic flop for me. This is a spot where you definitely want the continuation bet. It's so easy for my opponent to have a good hand that if I bet and he has anything, he's never folding. So I'm going to bet something like 480 so he calls with stuff like ace-king and ace-queen or any 9. You may think that I'm trying to make him fold those hands, but there's no way he's folding a lot of those hands no matter how much I bet. And I want to do everything. I want to do everything I can to ensure that he stays in with a hand that's drawing nearly dead. But he has apparently had nothing, so he got out of the way. Also, in general, on draw heavy boards, you're going to want to bet a touch bigger than normal, and say normal in quotation marks. Maybe on a 10-7-2 board, I would have bet 360 instead of 480. But I bet that size just to be balanced with my range in general. Ace-9 offsuit, I don't think there's any point in playing the hand. It's not a very good scenario. Open shove, call, re-raise. So this is a spot where I would expect this beast guy to have a very good hand, but given that he seems to be playing a lot of hands, he probably just has ace-8 or something absurdly bad. Let's see if the read's right. And yeah, king-queen, not shocking. A hand that he definitely should have folded to the initial shove. It's always important to try to figure out what your opponents are doing and don't just assume, oh, I would call in this spot only with very good hands. Because if I was in that situation, I'm calling with maybe ace-queen and better. And I may even shove with hands like ace-queen and better because you want to do everything you can to try to make your opponents fold stuff like ace-king and pocket jacks and whatnot. But if my calling range there is going to be almost entirely very premium hands. But again, I'm not playing that spot. That opponent was playing that spot. So try to get in his head and figure out what he is doing and why. King-jack suited. This is another spot where I have almost no equity, but I think I can get away with betting this flop. Heads up, in position, I have no problem continuation betting a pretty wide range. I may need to chill out just a little bit with it, but I mean, that was a pretty bad board for me. That was a very good board for the blinds range and a very bad board for my range, meaning that he should have middle cards way more often than I should have middle cards, so he could realistically check raise me pretty wide and get away with it a lot. But again, this is a $10 game. Players are not going to be doing that. They are going to play straightforward. And if he has something, he's going to check raise me. And if he doesn't have something, he's going to fold. In a higher stakes game, I may have to check behind that board because I'm going to get check raised a lot. And if I get check raised with king jack of spades, I can't really continue. So here's another example of a spot where facing an early position raiser, I'm just going to fold. I expect this guy to have a pretty strong hand, and I have to worry about the rest of the table. So I'm just going to get out of the way. So they pile money in, and the guy does have pocket aces. So again, I want to make it clear, I have not reviewed this hand history in my, between last night when I played it and today. And I did not see any of these hands. But this is just sort of standard stuff where guy raises under the gun, fold your king, queen. There's no point in playing it. It's sort of interesting. On the river, I think this guy played his hand really bad. On the river, when this guy bets 900, this is a very easy call with pocket aces. Given that this guy, I think he led 3 streets. So he calls a small blind, leads the flop, leads the turn. Guy has to call with pocket aces with the ace of hearts, obviously. River's a pretty good card for him for pocket aces, so I think you just have to call. You lose to 8-7, jack 8, and flushes. And I think if you shove, your opponent, I mean, he may call with some 1-pair hands, but he's certainly going to call with all the 2-pair hands, and he easily could have queen jack, jack 8, a flush draw. He could have all sorts of stuff. So very, very bad raise by this player on the river, I think. Just way too thin. So not a well-played pocket aces right there. Oh, man, I remember this one. This was a misclick. I did not see this guy limp. Or I didn't see him min raise. So this is what I get. Fully punished. I remember this one, and whenever I made this misclick, I thought, well, I guess it's lucky this was the $10 game and not the $500 game. Obviously, super terrible play. Facing an under the gun min raise, I would have just folded this. Again, this is the exact same scenario as I had the last hand, so I would have folded. I mean, it's the exact same thing. So I just explained why I would fold this, and obviously here, the action goes down such as this guy obviously has something pretty good, so I should have clearly folded, and I would have folded. So we would have faded it again if I didn't misclick. And the reason it was a min raise there is because I would have min raised that if they folded to me, or even under the gun. I'm fine min raising king queens from under the gun if I've been somewhat tight and there are antes in play. So that would have made my default play if that player did not play his hand. All right, so here we have a guy limping. if I have stats on him and I see stats this tight, I'm not going to raise with ace 7 offsuit, because this guy, unlike the previous guy that I was talking about raising his limps, this player's not playing very many hands. He's only playing 12% of hands to start with. So what is 12% of hands, and how does my hand do against that? So let's just go through here and click on hands so we get to 12% of them. We know he's raising the top 4%, so maybe that's where we should start. We should give him 4% of hands, so we know he's going to be raising with these. So this is 4.6% of hands. So he's going to be raising with these. Now let's fill this out to make it 12%. So that's 14%. So let's make it roughly like this. Take these out. And this is what we're going to be up against. So how does ace 7 offsuit do against this? Obviously, the hot and cold equity isn't that relevant. You see we're not in that bad a shape. The problem is that his hands are going to have much better playability after the flop than mine. And because of that, I don't think there's any point in playing this hand at all. So we're slightly behind, but I'm not really in love with that spot. Also, we do have to fade a limp re-raise. I mean, we don't know which 4% he's limping with. He could be limping with, for example, I'll show you guys what I mean. He could be limping with more, or could be raising with a lot of these hands right in here that are already in blue, and he could be limping with all the premium hands looking to limp re-raise. So you always have to be careful whenever you're constructing a range for your opponent, and don't assume that he raises the very top of it, and don't assume that he raises with the top part of that range, and that he calls with the bottom part of that range, because that's not necessarily what people do. I mean, that's all very clear whenever you see people 3-betting, because usually a 3-betting range is going to be stuff like good hands, maybe something like this, and then some random junk, right? So that means that his calling range is going to be in here. So he's 3-betting hands that are trash, and also 3-betting hands that are premium. So you can't just say that he calls with the top part or raises with the top part and calls with the bottom part. I probably could have said that a bit more eloquently. Jack 6 suited, I will probably take a flop in this scenario. Getting great odds. I mean, we're getting 6.6 to 1 to call. I think I can justify taking a flop. And I'm going to be playing very straightforward after the flop. I'm not going to be getting too out of line. I actually thought about check raising this. This is a pretty good flop for me and not a great flop for either of my opponents. If they have a pair, like pocket 7s, they can't be too happy. So I don't mind going for a check raise in that scenario, but I decided not to. Again, I'm just going to take low variance plays in this tournament. I'm not looking to do anything too crazy, at least initially. This king 5 offsuit, I could 3-bet. Again, if I was going to 3-bet, I'd probably make it 800 or maybe 675, and then obviously fold to a shove. So these are all trashy hands. All right, so I called with Jack 6 suited a second ago, but then I was getting 6.6 to 1. Here I'm getting 4 to 1. But I'm going to be against a much stronger range, and the stacks are shorter. So this is a scenario where I'm just going to fold pretty much every time. Okay, so whenever you have a pair, you're always going to want to make sure that you are getting at least 10 to 1 implied odds. And in this scenario, it is very close to 10 to 1. So anytime you're near the bottom of that, especially out of position, you're going to want to be a little bit tight. So I think this is a pretty good spot to fold. I'm just not deep enough to set mine. And you have to be careful in spots like this. You'll see that in live poker, for example, very few players are folding the pocket 2s right here. They're going to call or maybe even re-raise if they're crazy. But you cannot profitably call in that scenario, no matter who your opponent is. Even if he's very bad, I mean, he's going to recognize his equity way easier than you are, just purely because he's in position. So that's a spot where you just have to fold. A7 offsuit, I'll probably fold this if they fold to me. From the hijack seat, this is the button, this is the cutoff, this is the hijack. From the hijack seat, I'm fine folding ace-x offsuit. You definitely do not have to raise it. I feel like a lot of players think that because they folded to me, I have to raise. But if you look around, there are two guys who are relatively short. I mean, I'm pretty short. So this is not a scenario where I have to get involved. If I had something like ace 10 I would have raised. Ace 9 I think you could conceivably fold, although I'd probably raise ace 9, but it's close. Definitely not calling a shove with ace 2. I'm going to fold 7-2 offsuit every time. A lot of people think they have to play whenever they're on the button, when everyone folds around to them. Even though the blinds are relatively tight, seeing their 13 and 19 numbers, I don't need to play 7-2 offsuit. There's just no point in that. If they were really tight, like this 12-4 guy, I probably would have played the 7-2 offsuit, but it takes a really special player to be that incredibly tight. 10-7 offsuit again, I could raise this. I think I probably should have min-raised this one, mainly because I've been really tight recently. So I probably should have gone for that one, but folding is certainly fine as a default. Again, you have to be okay with hanging out. I mean, I've had not much for cards for the last 60 or 80 hands, and, we haven't made anything happen, but that's okay. You don't have to make something happen. Ace-9 offsuit under the gun, this is a spot where you definitely want to fold. This was perhaps my biggest leak coming up in poker. I want to make it perfectly clear. Playing this ace-9 offsuit or going all in with this ace-9 offsuit or min-raising it, that cost me so much money whenever I was learning to play poker. I learned with a few players around me who thought that any ace was good. I mean, ace is the best card in the deck. You have to play it, right? But after doing some math, I realized, if you have an ace from early position, like ace-9, ace-8, ace-7, and you have something like 11 or 12 or 13 big blinds, you need to fold it because it's too likely that someone else behind you has a better hand, either a pair or a better ace. And they're not going to fold it. So this is a spot where you need to fold your ace-9. You could conceivably min-raise, but I would be min-raising because I thought my opponents were incredibly nitty. Queen-8 suited. This is a similar spot to the 8-6 suited a minute ago, except for now we're getting even better odds. Earlier we're getting 3.9 to 1. Now we're getting 4.2 to 1. And our hand is a little bit better as well. So I'm okay taking a flop, but I don't love it. So I decided to check raise this flop. And the reason I decided to check raise was because if my opponent has random overcards, I don't want to let him realize that equity given how few chips he has left. And if he has a pair, he may just call off anyways. Looking back, though, I'm not even sure that I'm in love with this. I think what I want to do is make my opponent think I had a draw so that maybe he would call with any pair or maybe even ace high. That would be ideal. And also, whenever a player puts in 40% of his stack, a lot of people just don't fold at that point. Obviously, he should fold at this point. If he's sitting here with pocket twos and he knows my hand, he should fold. But a lot of players simply do not fold. But he does. So perhaps I made an error in this hand. I think if I check call the flop, I cannot check fold any turn. And I imagine if I check the turn, my opponent would bet some percentage of the time. So I may have given up a little bit of equity here. I think this may be, I guess I'll call it a classic mistake of making my opponent fold the worst hand. And I actually talk about this a ton. As stacks get much shorter, though, this is something I've been learning from a lot of the best poker players in the world. As stacks get very short, it's okay to protect your hand because, especially if your opponent's somewhat tight, he's not going to bluff to you. So if I know this guy has ace-king and I know he's never going to bluff, why even let him see those free cards? Or if, say he has pocket twos and I know he's never going to pay me off unless he improves, why let him see those two free cards? And the problem with this logic is that whenever I shove, obviously he's going to call me when I'm beat, right? So that's bad. However, I'm going broke every time I'm beat anyways. So you have to think, what is going to happen if I call the flop and then check the turn? Is this guy going to bluff me? And looking at his stats, these are very nitty stats. This guy is not too out of line. So that tells me that I cannot count on him to bluff me. If I was against someone who is a bit more active, like perhaps this player, I mean, he's not even that active. If we were against someone who had stats like mine, if he's playing a pretty aggressive game, I would have called versus someone like me because I can expect that guy to try to bluff me whenever a club comes or whenever a king comes or whenever an ace comes. But I think against a random tight aggressive player, I just can't count on that. So I think I need to go ahead and shove and recognize he's going to call me every time I beat, but he also may call me with a bluff catcher, like pocket sevens. And if he has an ace, I'm just probably protecting. I don't think I'm going to get too much action on the river or the turn of the river unless I improve. So he does fold, so it's a bit unfortunate. I wish he would have called pocket sevens. It would have made me look a lot better. But most likely he folded some hand that had 3 outs. So that's going to be it for part 1 of this video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please let me know. Thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you in the next video.